Billionaire father sees black waitress let his disabled son lead a dance step, and then changes her life forever. The silence that fell over Kingsley's, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, was so thick it seemed to have weight. Conversation stopped. Cutlery froze in midair as dozens of eyes fixed on the small space between the tables. 10-year-old Lucas Montgomery was visibly shaking. His legs, trapped in metal braces, wavered as he reached out to Diana Johnson, the restaurant's only black waitress. The live piano had just begun a soft melody, and the boy's impulse to ask someone to dance came without warning. "Sir, control your son." Manager Thornton's sharp voice cut through the silence. "That's inappropriate. This is not a dance hall, and our employees are not here to entertain children." Richard Montgomery, owner of Montgomery Investments and one of the richest men in the country, swallowed hard. It was the first time he had taken Lucas out to dinner in public since the accident that had partially paralyzed his legs 2 years earlier, a mistake he would not repeat. "Lucas, sit down." The order came low but firm. Diana remained motionless, her gaze shifting between the manager, the billionaire, and the boy whose hand was still hanging in the air. In her 5 years working there, she had learned to become invisible, especially to customers like Montgomery. "Mr. Thornton, I'm leaving. My shift is over." Her voice was calm as she removed her apron and placed it on the tray. Then, to everyone's amazement, she smiled at Lucas and took his hand. "I can't dance in an apron." Richard stood up abruptly. "What do you think you're doing?" Diana held his gaze. "I'm accepting an invitation, sir." Before anyone could interfere, Lucas took a hesitant step forward. His foot dragged painfully across the floor, the metal of his braces screeching. But Diana didn't try to guide him or hurry him. She simply adjusted her own pace to his. "She's getting fired tomorrow," whispered a woman at the next table. Richard watched, paralyzed. A sudden memory struck him. Elizabeth, his late wife, dancing with Lucas in the living room. "It's not about perfection," she had said. "It's about connection." As Diana followed Lucas's clumsy steps, something in the boy's eyes changed. Fear gave way to focus. Shame turned into shy pride. For the first time since the accident, he wasn't being guided, helped, or corrected. He was leading. "Mr. Montgomery," the manager's voice interrupted his thoughts. "I can assure you this will never happen again. She will be properly disciplined." Richard didn't respond. The entire restaurant seemed to wait for his reaction. After all, a man of his power could end anyone's career with a single word. Employees stopped what they were doing. Other customers watched with morbid curiosity. Lucas's smile, however, was the only sound that echoed in his father's mind. Diana led the boy back to the table after 3 dance steps. "Thank you for asking me out," she said formally, as if speaking to an adult. "It was an honor." When she turned to leave, Richard stopped her. "Wait." His voice sounded different, almost unrecognizable to himself. "What's your full name?" "Diana Johnson, sir." Richard nodded slowly. "Diana Johnson?" he repeated, as if memorizing it. Then he took a card from his jacket and handed it to her. "My office. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. The entire restaurant held its breath. Diana accepted the card without showing emotion, though her hand trembled slightly. "Dad!" Lucas called as she walked away. "Why did you do that?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Richard looked at his son and, for a brief moment, saw not just the child Elizabeth had left in his care, but a complete human being whose wants and needs he had ignored for 2 years. As dinner continued in awkward silence, no one noticed Diana's glance before she left. Not one of fear or resignation, but of quiet determination that contrasted with the storm brewing in Richard Montgomery's eyes. If this story about dignity and transformation is already touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. To follow how a simple gesture of respect can spark a silent revolution capable of transforming lives forever. The lobby of Montgomery. Tower sparkled with glass and marble walls reflecting the morning sunlight. Diana Johnson immediately felt out of place in her best outfit, a navy blue skirt and a white blouse bought on sale. The people passing by wore clothes that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Diana Johnson to see Mr. Montgomery," she said to the receptionist, who examined her with a clinical gaze before making a call. 18th floor. "Miss Winters will see you." In the elevator, Diana took a deep breath, clutching her worn purse to her chest. It wasn't fear she felt, but quiet determination that came from having faced worse, much worse. Miss Winters was a woman in her 40s with a sharp gaze and impeccable posture. "Mr. Montgomery is in a conference call. Please follow me." As they walked through the mirrored hallways, Diana felt the curious stares of employees. A black woman being escorted through the executive offices was rare enough to cause speculation. "He had you fired, didn't he?" Winters asked suddenly when they were alone in the waiting room. "It happens. Powerful clients call and people like you lose their jobs." "People like me? You know what I mean?" Winters said, adjusting her glasses. "Employees who don't know their place." Diana smiled, not amused. "And where exactly would that be?" Before Winters could answer, her phone rang. "He'll see you now." Richard Montgomery's office took up half the floor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan looked like a distant playground. The man stood gazing out at the city as if it were his personal property. "Mr. Montgomery," Diana greeted him formally. Richard turned, his face a mask of studied control. "Miss Johnson, thank you for coming." He pointed to a chair. "Please." The silence that followed was calculated, a tactic Diana recognized instantly. The kind designed to make nervous people talk too much, to incriminate themselves. "Do you have a background?" Richard finally asked. "Excuse me?" "Education, college." Bachelor's degree in child development from NYU. Incomplete master's in special education. Something flickered across Richard's face. Surprise, perhaps. "And you work as a waitress?" "I work 3 jobs, actually. The restaurant, a bookstore on weekends, and tutoring when I can get students." Richard moved to the table, picking up a folder. "I did some research on you, Miss Johnson. I wanted to understand who the person was who—" He hesitated. "Danced with my son." He opened the folder, revealing printed photos of a community center. "Freedom Steps. You founded that 6 years ago." "I co-founded it with my sister Zoe, a dance program for children with physical disabilities." Richard leafed through the documents. "Which is now about to close due to lack of funding." Diana showed no surprise. Of course, he would have found that out in less than 24 hours. "I didn't come here to ask for money, Mr. Montgomery." "Then why did you come?" "Because you invited me." Richard laughed softly, a joyless sound. "Fair enough." He stood again, restless. "I want you to work for me." Diana blinked, taken aback. "As a waitress in your house?" Richard's face hardened. "As a therapeutic companion for Lucas." His son's name seemed difficult for him to say. Diana noticed his eyes drift briefly to a photo on the table, a smiling woman holding a baby. "I have the best specialists in the country," Richard continued. "Physical therapists, neurologists, psychologists. But what you did yesterday?" He paused, the words heavy. "It was just a dance, Mr. Montgomery. It was the first time I've seen him smile since the accident." The admission was painful. "I don't want a dancer for my son. I want someone who can do what you did. Follow, not lead." Diana studied him closely. Beneath the facade of power and control, she saw what others might not, a desperate, lost father. "I can pay you 5 times what you're making now." Diana stood up. "No." Richard looked shocked, unaccustomed to hearing that word. "I don't work for people who see only my color or my social class before they see my competence," she said calmly. "And I definitely don't work for people who try to buy solutions to emotional problems." Richard's face flushed. "You're turning down an offer that would solve your financial problems out of pride?" "Out of dignity," Diana corrected. "And because your son deserves more than someone hired to pretend to care." She walked to the door, then paused. "Lucas doesn't need more experts. He needs space to lead his own life." "You don't know my son." "No," Diana agreed. "But I know people like him. People whose physical limitations are nothing compared to the invisible cages we build around them." She took a card from her purse and placed it on the table. "Freedom Steps. Classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 p.m. If you'd like to bring Lucas, the first class is free." As Diana left, she passed Winters, who had obviously been listening behind the door. "You just turned down an offer from Richard Montgomery," she whispered, incredulous. "Are you crazy?" Diana smiled. Maybe, but I'd rather be crazy than be property. The following Wednesday, Diana was at the reception desk of the community center when Zoe, her sister and co-founder of the project, came running up. "There's a Bentley parked outside," she whispered, nervously adjusting her hijab. "And you won't believe who's inside." Through the window, Diana saw the luxurious car. Lucas sat in the back seat, looking anxiously out the window. Richard remained in the driver's seat, his hands still gripping the wheel as if fighting an internal battle. "He's not coming in," Zoe predicted. "Men like him don't come to places like this." Diana smiled, remembering Lucas's eyes during those few dance steps. Don't underestimate the power of a determined son. As they watched, the car door opened. Lucas got out slowly, adjusting his braces. Then, to everyone's surprise, Richard stepped out too. The billionaire looked out of place in his casual pants and sweater, an obvious attempt to dress less formally, but still screaming privilege. "I told you he'd come," Diana murmured to herself. Zoe stared. "What did you do?" Diana didn't answer, but her eyes glowed with a secret not even her sister fully knew. In her tiny Bronx apartment, hidden under her bed, was a notebook, filled with notes about children like Lucas and men like Richard Montgomery. Years of observation, research, and a plan that had begun with a simple acceptance of an invitation to dance. What Richard Montgomery didn't know, what he couldn't imagine in his world of glass towers and endless bank accounts, was that Diana Johnson wasn't just a waitress who had danced with his son. She was a woman with a mission. And his empire of isolation and privilege was about to face its greatest challenge: the simple truth that some of life's greatest lessons cannot be bought. They must be lived. Freedom. Steps operated out of an old community warehouse. Handmade posters decorated the walls with phrases like "your rhythm, your rules," and "every move counts." When Richard and Lucas entered, children with various mobility devices practiced free movements to the sound of a light beat. "Mr. Montgomery," Diana greeted, wearing simple clothes with the program logo. "Welcome." Lucas watched the other children in awe. A girl in a wheelchair spun gracefully while a boy with a prosthetic leg created a rhythm of steps. "It looks chaotic," Richard commented, visibly uncomfortable. "There is structure," Diana replied, "just not the one you recognize." She turned to Lucas. "Would you like to join in?" The boy nodded eagerly, but looked at his father, hesitant. "Go on," Richard said tensely. "I'll be right here." As Diana guided Lucas to the group, Zoe approached Richard and offered him a chair. "The first day is always the hardest," she said. "For the parents, not the kids." "This isn't therapy," Richard argued. "I hired the best rehabilitation specialists." "And how has that been working for Lucas?" Zoe asked gently. The studio door opened. An older woman entered, leaning on an ornate cane. Her gray hair was braided elegantly, her posture commanding. "Dr. Elaine Mercer," Zoe whispered. "Neuroscientist, expert in brain plasticity, retired from Harvard." The woman greeted several children before noticing Richard. "Mr. Montgomery, you've rejected my research proposal 3 times in the last 2 years. Dr. Mercer, I didn't expect to see you here." "I oversee the research program," she explained. "We're studying how non-directive movement affects neural reconfiguration in children with motor challenges." "Research?" Richard frowned. "I thought this was just a community dance class." Diana returned, leaving Lucas exploring movements with another child. Freedom Steps is a pilot motor rehabilitation program based on the theory of movement autonomy, she said. "We integrate adaptive dance with neuroscience." Then, why work as a waitress if you lead a research program? "Because we don't have enough funding yet, and because people like you rejected us 3 times. The realization hit him. "You were Dr. Mercer's assistant on those proposals." "Co-author," Dr. Mercer corrected. Diana had to leave her master's program to care for her sister, but her theoretical work is groundbreaking. You knew who I was at the restaurant, Richard concluded. From the moment you walked in, Diana confirmed. And when Lucas got up to dance, I recognized the chance to show, not tell. So it was staged. The dance? Absolutely not. Lucas chose to stand. I chose to follow. A group of reporters entered the studio. Richard immediately stiffened. What's this? Part 2 of the plan, Diana said softly. Zoe handed Richard a newspaper with a headline. Revolutionary motor rehabilitation methodology shows promising results. We published our first results today, Doctor, Mercer explained. And we invited the press. You used my son for a publicity stunt, Richard said coldly. Diana led him into a side room where photos of dozens of children lined the walls, each marked with handwritten progress notes. On the last wall hung an empty frame. What's that? He asked. Our future, she answered. A full rehabilitation center we could build if we had the resources. 500 children a year instead of 50. You orchestrated all this, Richard muttered. The dance, the meeting, bringing me here on press day. I saw an opportunity and took it. 4 months ago, when you canceled our meeting without reading the proposal, I promised myself I'd find another way. Diana, Zoe interrupted suddenly. It's Lucas. They rushed back. Lucas stood in the center of the room surrounded by children. The music had stopped, and everyone watched in silence. The boy had removed one brace and was trying to balance on just one leg. Lucas, Richard started forward, but Diana stopped him. Wait, she whispered. Watch. Lucas took a deep breath, focused. And to everyone's astonishment, especially his father's, he took a full step without support. It was small, shaky, but entirely his. The children cheered, cameras flashed. Richard's face, usually controlled and expressionless, now revealed unshed tears glistening in his eyes. That's why we created Freedom Steps, Diana said softly. It's not about perfect steps. It's about first steps on your own. Richard watched his son, not as a patient or a project, but as a complete human being discovering his own strength. This could have been done without manipulating me, he said finally. It could have been, Diana replied. If you had answered our calls or read our proposals 3 times. The reporters noticed Richard. A murmur spread as Lucas, unaware of the tension, continued practicing his new step with full concentration. Richard Montgomery was cornered. Before him lay 2 choices: walk away in anger, proving the world right, about his arrogance, or embrace the moment his son had created. Between the power he'd always controlled and the freedom his son needed, he now stood on unfamiliar ground, where neither wealth nor status could dictate the next step. His gaze shifted between the reporters waiting and his son smiling. Humility had never been part of his vocabulary, but as he watched Lucas's transformation, something within him began to break. The orchestra of privilege he had always conducted was now playing a different tune, one that demanded he listen. Richard Montgomery faced the cameras. His son had just taken a step on his own, and Diana Johnson had guided him to this impossible moment. Mr. Montgomery, a reporter called, can you comment on your presence here today? Is it true your foundation rejected funding for this program 3 times? Richard glanced at Lucas, who was still focused on his new step, oblivious to the world watching. Then, to everyone's shock, especially Diana's, he smiled. You know what's hardest for someone in my position? Richard began, his voice carrying through the room. Admitting when we're wrong. A stunned silence followed. The Montgomery Foundation is pleased to announce a commitment to fully fund Freedom Steps for the next 5 years and to build a permanent rehabilitation center based on the methodology developed by Dr. Mercer and Ms. Johnson. Camera flashes exploded. Zoe let out a cry of surprise. On one condition, he added, watching Diana tense up, that Ms. Johnson retain complete autonomy over the program and its methodology. No corporate interference. 3 months later, bulldozers were clearing the ground for the new Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center. The project wasn't the most luxurious the Montgomery Foundation had ever funded, but it was the most innovative, with every space designed with direct input from the children and their families. Diana supervised construction frequently, but never alone. Lucas showed up often, sometimes bringing other children with him. And to the staff's continued surprise, Richard Montgomery also appeared, silently observing the progress. "I never thought you'd actually show up at board meetings," Diana commented one afternoon as they reviewed the plans. "I never thought I'd have to study neuroplasticity at 50, Richard replied, rubbing his tired eyes. In front of him lay a scientific article marked with sticky notes. "But here we are." Diana looked at the man curiously. "Is this part of your public penance, or do you really care?" "Lucas asked to have his second brace removed last week." "I know, he told me. His previous therapist said that would be impossible for at least 2 years. Diana smiled. "But you fired her, remember? Because you told me she was wrong." And she was. Diana pointed to a photo of Lucas balancing with only one crutch. "He's progressing faster than any traditional prediction." "Why did you never accept my apology?" Richard asked suddenly. "Because you never apologized. You redirected resources, changed policies, and funded our program. That's not an apology, it's compensation." Richard nodded slowly. "Fair again." At the opening ceremony 6 months later, the contrast with that night in the restaurant couldn't have been greater. The huge adaptive space was filled with children using various mobility devices, all moving freely. In the center of the main hall, Lucas, now wearing only a lightweight brace on his left leg, led a small, choreographed routine with 3 other children. His movements were still limited, but they flowed with a confidence no doctor had predicted. Richard watched from a distance, not interfering. "He doesn't need you to hold him anymore," Diana said quietly. "No," Richard agreed, "but he still needs me to be around." "Crucial difference." Richard turned to face her. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what exactly?" "For teaching me to follow," a reporter approached. "Mr. Montgomery, how does it feel to see your son's progress?" Richard looked at Lucas, who was now helping a younger girl find her balance. "Proud. Not of what he's overcome, but of what he's created for others." "And what's been the biggest lesson you've learned on this journey?" Richard Montgomery, the man once known only for his financial empire, looked directly into the camera. "That true leaders aren't those who guide others down the path they believe is right, but those who have the courage to follow when someone shows them a better way." A year later, the Freedom Steps program expanded to 3 new cities. Diana received the Pediatric Rehabilitation Innovation Award, and her methodology began to be implemented in hospitals across the country. Lucas, now using only a light cane on difficult days, enrolled in regular school and became a youth spokesperson for the program, inspiring other children to find their own pace. And Richard learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of all, that true power does not lie in controlling every move, but in knowing when it's time to step back and let others lead the way. In a world where powerful people rarely change their perspectives, and where those without power often remain in the shadows, the story of Richard, Diana, and Lucas reminds us that true transformation occurs when we cross the invisible boundaries that separate us. When a billionaire learns from a waitress, when a father follows in his son's footsteps. If this story about how a simple gesture of dignity changed lives forever touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to our channel, because we believe the most profound revolutions don't start with grand manifestos or billion-dollar fortunes. They start when someone has the courage to take an authentic first step, and someone else has the wisdom to follow. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories.